Evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Man's Hour 16 on Waiting for Caesar. I'm joined by a gentleman of power here. Not me, not you, returning guest. How are you, sir?
Doing great, Red Hawk. I am also waiting for Caesar. It's very coincidental.
Yeah, aren't we all? Aren't we all? Well, so the reason why I wanted to address this topic here is kind of in the wake of we want to be really careful for Susan here. The official story of the Bolsonaro election down in Brazil that was totally legitimate in all ways. There was no tomfoolery whatsoever going on there, and I believe the mainstream narrative, of course. So this is the main reason why I wanted to address this topic here. So essentially, what we're left with here on this circle of the internet here, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that we all are realizing that something is seriously wrong with the current regime, the current system, democracy, whatever you want to call it. We've got problems here, and obviously, people are trying to figure out, okay, what can we do about this? Do we, elect these? Do we elect different people? Do we clear them out? Do we, found something new? And then lastly, we've got this idea called waiting for Caesar. And for those of you that aren't familiar, it's the concept of, the strong man, for lack of a better word, coming in and basically, telling everybody else to fuck off, basically. And I'm going to take the reins of power and rule with an iron fist and, fix everything. And I'm not going to lie, I am very, very sympathetic to this idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in our circles, all these ideas get thrown around of like, how do we deal with this? How do we move forward? And while it's important to remember that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, like you can have multiple ideas going at the same time or doing multiple things. The one that's most appealing to especially men is that some strong man can come and rally, young men to fight for something worth fighting for.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been making this point a few times recently, but you know, the really, truly, in my opinion, I think like the last truly strongman president, at least that we had in the United States of America, was probably somebody like Teddy Roosevelt. Like we saw parts of it with people like Nixon and Reagan. We saw a little bit of it with Trump. We saw a little bit of it with George W. Bush after 9/11 attacks. But really, the last time we really saw a strongman president was I think Teddy Roosevelt, and that's a long time. That's 120 years basically since TR was in charge, and I see it everywhere, especially in America, particularly after the Biden election, that men in this country are they're really starving for a leader, somebody to fight for. The energy here just feels so dead compared to what it was just 2 short years ago when Trump was in charge of things. Like people were ecstatic about the economy, people were excited about starting businesses again, people were excited about forging their own lives, and it seemed like the American dream was coming back. But now it's just all right. We've got this decrepit old man who doesn't know where he is all the time, who probably can't even wipe his own ass, and this guy is supposed to inspire us to go to the moon or basically do anything of value to make a mark in history. So I absolutely do think that if like this strongman character, not just in places like Brazil or America, but in many places in the West, I do think a very very large portion of men would side with this very quickly.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the regime knows this. That's why they can't allow what they perceive to be this sort of figure in power, and they'll pull out any stops in order to make that thing. And every time they do this, they're reminded again why they have to take like stronger and stronger measures. So as we saw with the early 2021 event in Washington following the totally legitimate 2020 election. And now with the totally legitimate election in Brazil and the people showing up outside the military headquarters, um, people are getting like more and more disaffected and they're demanding uh, shall we say, unorthodox changes in greater and greater number. And I think that the current elite are definitely taking note of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how could they not? I mean, they certainly have taken note. I mean, in America after that fateful day, as we know. I mean, uh, those barriers that are up at the Capitol building are never coming down. Yeah, at this point, those are permanent fixtures now. I mean, it really does kind of suck because, I mean, I made a joke earlier this year on Twitter that after the 1 year anniversary, I said, happy 1 year anniversary to the greatest letdown in American history. and and it's very, it's very much the case. I mean, like, we're seeing this right now in like places like Brazil, but it's like, and they're having way bigger crowds show up than we're here in America for sure. And I think that's kind of because Brazil has a history of military dictatorship. I mean, they had one for, I think it was around like 60 years in the 1900s, and it just left in the 80s. So like this is still very fresh in a lot of people's minds. So, as a relate in comparison to America, who, I mean, we had a dictator, his name was FDR, but people don't see it that way. So, but I still think that, that pure masculine, energy, people want to follow the strong man. It's just a staple of the human psyche, and it's never going to leave us.
Yeah, and it's also partially like an aesthetic thing, like you were saying. Us follow like we're supposed to follow this old decrepit guy who doesn't know where he is, and then where is he bringing us? Like there are no positives to who we have as a leader right now, except for maybe if you wanted to giggle about how like bad the regime has become at image crafting, because there's no like they're despite everything that they're trying to do, there's no way that they're putting a positive spin on this dude.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see this with a bunch of characters right now. Have you seen any of these videos of this clown, this John Fetterman guy running in Pennsylvania against Dr. Oz? This guy literally had a stroke at the beginning of the campaign season here, and every time they put him on TV, the guy is just slurring his words left and right. He can barely form a sentence. It's honestly worse than Biden, as it relates to speechcraft that this guy's got. And this is the guy that the Democrats are putting forward in the Pennsylvania election. I mean, it's kind of funny that they're putting up against celebrity Dr. Oz here, which is hilarious. But we truly are just living in absolute clown world, man.
Yeah, and I like a couple of years ago, I think someone on UO was talking about how all of these things are humiliation rituals. And I was a little bit like, I don't know. But since then, like every month that goes by, I'm getting more and more convinced that it really is just like the real people behind the throne are just like, yeah, just demoralize them as much as they can. And you know, the pressure just keeps building, and it keeps building, and it keeps building. And while I don't think any of us really believe in people power, or in the unorganized mass to like rise up and actually do anything, it means that the conditions are being set where when there is that strong man that everyone is just salivating for, it's going to be unstoppable. At least that's the hope.
Yeah, that it certainly is the hope. I mean, of course, we have a bunch of, historical precedents for this. And, it's just, I keep going back to, like the leader that everyone really, really wants to follow. I mean, I think back to, these historical figures like Alexander the Great, Caesar, Genghis Khan, Hernan Cortez, whoever it was, the men that they had under the command, absolutely would have, I mean, they did, they died for them. They believed in their cause. They built amazing statues and temples in their honor. They wrote history books about them and everything like this. I mean, and you just see this all throughout history in every single era, even in like, you could call it modern times with, people like Napoleon, or you could call it even postmodern times with things like Mustache Man and Bigger Mustache Man, and things like this. I mean, it really just is part of, the human psyche that really, no matter how much the regime tries, it's never going to be put away. This is just simply how human beings are. We're hierarchical creatures, and people just want to follow where the power is.
Yeah, and it does. When you were going through that list of leaders, it reminds me. So the ancient examples, those were all people who had frontiers to conquer, and they did, and that's one of the reasons why people followed them. And in the more modern examples, almost all of them were reacting to like something terrible going on in their society. And yeah, I was just recently listening to Thomas 777 talk to BAP, and it was from I think a year or so ago, but they brought up a very salient point. Like the Frankists didn't get their foothold with like didn't actually start doing anything until the bodies of priests and nuns were literally stacking up in mass graves. And I feel that's the same way with Big Chin Man and Mustache Man. Uh, Things have to get really bad for that strong man to step onto the stage and for the conditions to be right for the people to get on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely does seem to, go that way that in the modern times, things really do need to be absolutely, terrible for people to basically, uh, you know, basically flip the game board, so to speak, at family game night and just say, fuck it, we're backing this guy. I mean, as we said in the ancient world, I don't want to say it was, I wouldn't necessarily want to call it easier, but because it was still very difficult to go out and like conquer foreign lands, but it just seems like you had more. I guess I'd call it more opportunity. Like the world is shrinking now. Like there really aren't these lands out there for men to be formed into these extremely strong characters. And I guess that's something we could talk about right now as well. Is where would we find a character like this? I mean, like you look at the United States military right now. I mean, there's certainly no Pattons, there's no MacArthur's, there's no Jacksons, there's no Jim Bowie's or even Ulysses S. Grant's, Robert E. Lee's. There's none of these people left. Like who are we looking forward to? Like Mad Dog Mattis, the guy's literally making up names to sound more badass than he actually is. Like or I mean, I guess like the last person would be like someone like I don't know Schwarzkopf, but even he doesn't live up to the gravitas of these men of old.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We don't have any figures that come to mind, and I think that that when they do arise, they're going to come from some odd places. There's a story that floats around about red team versus blue team wargaming, and I have no way to speak to its veracity, but apparently during these war games, or as the story goes, it's a war game of the Second American Civil War and red versus blue, and the this character keeps popping up in every war game. They call him Tom. Basically, Tom is a local warlord who, he's a veteran. He was a truck driver when he got back. He couldn't really hold a steady job, but people liked him, and he was good at what he did. And during a time of unrest, he's able to rally the people in his community, and he basically becomes a warlord of an important artery somewhere in the United States. And whether or not there's any veracity to the idea that this character keeps popping up in official government war games, I think that's where a great men will arise out of just good community leaders. No one really has heard of them, and they'll kind of rise to prominence on their ability to lead the local community.
Yeah, it definitely does seem like that kind of has to be where it came from. And I mean, of course, there are great historical examples for this as well. I mean, like, Caesar did this himself. He basically rallied his troops after his victory in, what would eventually become France, Gaul at the time. And he, famously crossed that Rubicon and took power and started a war with the first triumvirate, or was it the second one? I forget, but I'm not a Roman historian. But, and then, of course, Cortez did something very similar, where he basically disobeyed the orders of people coming from Veracruz, and he rallied his whole army of men around him, basically. And Cortez's case, he burnt the ships that they arrived in. He's just like, you guys are backing me now. There's no going back. And it's just, I wonder if I, like this idea sounds really, really good on paper. I'm just wondering if it's applicable to the modern world with things like telecommunications and things like this these days. Can I keep coming back to this idea like the world is shrinking, and can someone really, get away with forming, their little niche in a certain corner and then, granting more and more power, does it, do we really think it could become as overt as it was in the past? Or do you think it has to be something more, covert. I mean, like what people like I don't know, somebody like Moldbug or Peter Thiel or maybe even Musk, and to some extent what they're kind of pushing for, like a an uprising of like elites, like in the shadows kind of deal. I'm still not really convinced on this idea.
Yeah, I mean, who can know? But in this case, I agree. The world is shrinking, and the regime's control over the minds of the masses, and by extension, the minds of like the minor and even like mid-level elites is pretty absolute, or at least it seems that way. I think it would be one of those things that would have to start off as, something that isn't worth paying attention to, and then like, if it hits a critical mass where the momentum keeps it going despite the regime's attempts to shut it down, it would be like a, 1 in a million kinda thing, like a not something you can really plan for, just, one of those flukes of history where it just sort of happens.
Yeah, and one of the one of the really difficult things about, using historical precedent for conversations like this is that it's so much easier, to just look back in the history books and see, what was months, weeks, years, in some cases just fly by on one page, and it's it would be almost impossible to actually recognize something is happening, in the moment until truly it does happen. So it always is difficult when looking at these historical things. What was it that I think this is a Lenin quote. It's like sometimes you know the quote about like years sometimes pass in weeks, and then sometimes it's some shit like that. I have to look it up, but sometimes years
Yeah.
go by in weeks or something or whatever. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's something like there are decades where nothing happens, but weeks where decades happen.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing because you can't plan for it. Like, I hear the people bandy this around a bunch. Like, the IRA started in a pub, and that's what it is. The all of these movements and these elite things, they come out of this a small group of nepotistic men who just reinforce each other like in every way. And a part of me suspects that this might be why the regime makes like pumps out this idea that men being close to one another is gay to try to atomize them so they can't make these manner buns that are able to do this. But there are people out there who are doing this. They're in their little political spheres. They're getting involved in local politics, and they're bringing their friends up by pure nepotism. And really, anybody who wants to make any sort of change needs to do something exactly like that.
Yeah, that is absolutely certainly true that the regime does not want men forming these kinds of bonds. And, as much as we hate to admit it, they've been pretty effective in this regard, particularly over the last 100 years. And that begs the question, really, where are we going to, find these kinds of, strong men to actually, go through with this, so to speak? I mean, it's so bizarre looking at this, and I tweeted about this recently, and this is actually a big point that BAP makes as well, is that our elites of today are just so absolutely bizarre in their, I would almost call it, lack of masculine drive and masculine energy. You have a guy like Jeff Bezos, who is the richest man in the history of the planet. And what does he do with all of his riches? Basically, what he does is he gets divorced, and then he goes and marries a, 35-year-old, like MILF with previous kids who isn't even that attractive, and then spends his time trying to, basically kiss the ass of celebrities. It's like this fucking guy could be, buying weapons. He could be forging armies. He could literally be staging coups overseas or something like this, and gaining some serious political power somewhere. But it's just so bizarre that this, masculine drive has just been bred out of almost everybody in like all the, levels of our society.
Yeah, and it's the elite of the Nietzschean last man. So it like this guy, he through whatever means has tons of money, but he lacks vision. He has no romance. He has no no Faustian spirit left in him. He's just, all right. He's bought into the system. It seems that like Bezos is what any uh Eggman or Bugman neckbeard would be with his like, oh, now I can buy a Funko Pop factory. Like, that's the only thing that they know, and they don't really want to know anything else. Like, obviously now we're just trying to uh understand the mind of a person unknown, but from all outward appearances, it's just our elite aren't deserving of the title, and they are there because they're riding a dying wave that was, kicked up by greater men before them.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does seem that in the ashes, as we like to call it, I mean, truly nothing is left unscathed, even the elites. You'd think that these elites, in order to hold on to their power, would have to have some, you know, direct, concept of these, call it whatever you will, Machiavellian, extreme masculine thought processes. But it just seems that in the West, they just don't have it. I mean, like, whatever you say about Vladimir Putin, and there's plenty to criticize him for. I mean, I don't see this energy coming from people like him, or maybe people like I don't know. Think somebody like I don't know, like Saddam. I mean, like he had his own issues. Obviously, I mean, he's a fucking madman. But it just seems like everyone in the West is pussified, even at the way top.
Yeah, and at risk of going around, it really does seem like they just buy into the bullshit. They actually believe these things. And if we're talking about leaders around the world, Putin has done actual tangible good for Russia, and he kicked out the oligarchs that were profiteering off of Russia's malaise, and now Russian cities are cleaner and more efficient than America's cities. So it's, you know there is something about being on top for too long that just makes you complacent. And as with everything, the macro and the micro look really, really similar. An individual who stays too long without being challenged gets complacent and fat, and that's exactly what we've done in the West. And since we still operate under the guise of a democracy, the people that are chosen to be our elected leaders, they resemble the mass, the uninspired, uh, undriven mass man who has nothing to contribute.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I made this point recently as well, is that let's say that we have these examples, these recent ones in the West, of people like Trump, of what it seems to be that Bolsonaro is going to follow in suit with what Donald Trump did. We have these examples for us, but I think especially here in America, not so much so as in other Western nations like Europe, but I think this is definitely a possibility in the United States that the right wing parties over here are quite frankly ours to inherit, and by ours I mean like our sphere. We just have to take it, and we can use these people like Trump, like Bolsonaro, as examples essentially of what not to do. And really just wake people up to the actual cold hard reality of things. That, listen, like, if you're going to play chicken, you really really do have to go. You know, you got to call the bluff. And so it'd be very interesting to see where these things go in the future, because it's not like the regime is going to start producing extremely strong masculine leftists anytime soon. Like they're just going to be producing more and more bug men. So I don't want to be all black pilled on this.
Yeah, no, there are massive opportunities, and there are easy ways forward. Even if you're not the type of person who is interested in getting into public life, or being a theory seller, a nerd who just talks about elite theory and how to move forward. uh, the most important thing that you can do as an individual is be aesthetically pleasing, because when you're having discussions with people about your ideas, the way that you look and the way that people perceive you is way more important than the ideas coming out of your mouth. People will give more credence to an idea spoken by a beautiful person than they will an ugly person, even if that beautiful person has an IQ of room temperature and they're speaking utter nonsense. They'll still get more. They still have more weight than some nerd who is absolutely 100% right. And that's just the way humans are. So like you were just saying, Red Hawk, the left wing isn't going to be producing people that anyone wants to follow, that anyone wants to look up to. So for us on the right, it's a pretty simple task of hitting the gym, grooming ourselves, and learning how to dress well.
Yeah, very much so. Aesthetics are king in so many things in life, and this is just a simple fact of the matter. I mean, I I truly do believe that in modern, like, conservative and political talking points, I really don't think anything has been more destructive than Ben Shapiro's statement that facts don't care about your feelings. It's like, well, feelings don't care about your facts, and that is absolutely 100% true, more so than the other way with this, goofball, the net negative, as we like to call him, says, so like, of course, if you are the kind of guy who's charismatic, who's good looking, again, people just naturally going to want to follow, our brains, as human beings, we have such massive brains compared to all other animals, and our brains, in order for us to function every day in the world, we have to form quick mental pathways, almost like shortcuts, basically, in order to make it through the world, because we'd be thinking about everything way too much. We wouldn't be able to get anything done. And a simple, shortcut in everyone's brain essentially is, okay, is this guy, got his shit together? I'm going to listen to him more. It's no different than doing like a cold approach with a chick. If you just have confidence and, a take no bullshit attitude, it carries you way further than autistically breaking down like your bank account and your dick size and your compatibility or whatever bullshit you want to spew.
Yeah, and you even see it on social media. Whenever there's an argument, sooner or later, someone is going to say post physique, as if that matters in any way to what's going on. But this drives to a deeper point. Like it's not pure narcissism. It's not that like we want to be the hottest fasces on the block. Oh, what it is that we don't operate in a vacuum, and time is never it never ceases to move forward. There will be more people who look in at the movement because they heard about it, or they stumble across it, or they age into caring about these sorts of things. And when they look in on our space, what we want them to see are strong, capable men, because everyone wants to be where the strong, capable man is. And if we can like project that image, that's going to bring more people from the mass onto our side. And though the mass doesn't matter, the mass is where the new rogue elite that are going to be able to challenge the regime in ways we are currently not are going to arise. Because as the system continues to break down, there will be vacuums that our new elite can fill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with complacency comes vulnerability, and the regime is getting extremely, extremely complacent more and more so with the things that they're trying to do. I mean, like, do, do they think it's going to be a really, really smart idea when they, start pushing more and more of this gender theory bending nonsense, more of this eat the bugs crap, more of this living in the pod metaverse kind of stuff? Like, more and more people, just because of what human beings are, at an intrinsic level, are not going to be able to be propagandized into this more and more absurd stuff. I mean, absolutely, people can be brainwashed. We've absolutely seen that. But each time this, brainwashing, goes up another notch, there are people that see through it. That I think that's absolutely true. I mean, just look at a space like ours. I mean, it keeps growing every single year. Maybe not as big as we would like, but it's still growing regardless.
Yeah, and the number of disaffected grow every year. If the purpose of all of this economic hullabaloo is to destroy the middle class and get people um, dependent, there is a spirit in man that, while it might not be a part of the majority, and it doesn't need to be, that won't allow it to be held down, that won't allow it to be subjugated in this way. And as things get worse and people realize more and more that like the policies that are making these things worse. It's the decisions being made by people we didn't vote for, making things worse. Then they will continue to be more and more disaffected, and they will be looking for answers. And then they'll find us. Well, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, indeed. You know, Zach Frisbee brings up an interesting comment in the chat here about the possibility of a foreign leader. I've given some thought to this. I mean, like, obviously, this certainly did occur multiple times in the past where, one lord or one king would finance a rival and take out another guy and institute him in right there. Um, I'd be very curious to see if that would work to the extent in a massive first world country like the United States. I mean, certainly the United States has a history of doing this. I mean, just look at the CIA throughout the last 100 years. So this certainly isn't uncommon.
No, it's definitely possible. And like, the young Americans, oikophobia, is definitely ascendant. But I think that the American spirit or the American culture is still, especially among dissidents, is still so chauvinistic. And I think that's a good thing, that we would never accept that sort of thing. Although I do see a time coming soon where, the presidency is opened up to non-citizens. Um, I could put a number on it, like maybe a couple of decades, but everything that I think is 10 years away turns out to be about 2 years away. So I don't even want to guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it it certainly doesn't paint a very bright future. I mean, it's one thing over here in America. I mean, despite what everyone complains about, anyways, but America does have a history of quote unquote multiculturalism, whatever problems we have with it. But I see this as being a much bigger problem in some place like Europe, where they are literally shipping in 1 million Pakistanis into the British Isles every single year. Like the regime basically at this point is just importing foot soldiers like foreign mercenaries and Machiavelli's day.
Yeah, and Rishi Sunak and all that absolute clown show going on, in the Home Office there. Yeah, I don't see anything like that happening in the United States, anytime soon. But again, as things continue to collapse, who knows what rises out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, opportunities can pretty much storm out of anywhere. What do you think about let's say like a concept we're playing ideal ball or war games here with stuff like this. Like, I'm just wondering, like, where do we go to really forge these guys into the positions? It seems like if you try to, I don't know if you've seen this episode of Murdoch, but that there's an idea of like they're trying to get into the system and change it from within. They're like, but of course, the iron rule of oligarchy in the sense of like the system's going to change you before you change the system. So I'm wondering about like, the perfect example of this right now is looking at the military down in Brazil. It's like you literally have citizens by the millions banging on the barracks doors, just begging the military guys to take over, and none of the guys are doing it. So it's like, can our guys really become these people inside these institutions, or are they going to get kicked out? Are they going to be changed by the system itself? Are the incentives going to be there? Is there any hope for somebody actually within the regime itself to rise up, or would it have to be somebody who's outside of it entirely?
I think it's pretty clear that it would have to be somebody outside of it. Like, obviously, we don't know the inner workings, play for play, but all you have to do is look at the structure of the military, and even, the structure of our military. And then what's interesting is that after our military implemented these things, so too did the Vatican. But let me, elaborate a little bit more. Um, Officers are shuffled around in the military. They will do a couple of years at a post before being moved to a new one. And this isn't arbitrary. This is specifically to prevent, uh, loyalty being built up around an individual. If your men aren't with you for long periods of time, if they aren't with you through, long campaigns, then that loyalty just isn't going to be built up. And the Vatican started doing that as well with their priests. They shuffle them around to make sure that no parish gets too attached. But so the military option is, I don't think it's very likely, uh, simply because of that. Um, but being within the system in general, if you're trying to get into the system to overthrow it from the inside based on your principles, um, you know, your action is belief. If you don't know what you believe, put yourself in a situation where you have to react to something involved with that belief, and then you'll know. When you start take you're going if you're going into the system to try and change it from within, you're going to have to take actions that go against the beliefs that led you there in the first place, which will change your psyche. You can't do something without it having an effect on what you believe, even if it's on a subconscious level. So I think the system changes you in more ways than just forcing you to do something, because eventually you believe it. I mean, even the Vietnamese knew this when they had American GIs, GI POWs write letters all the time about why the American Empire was so terrible, and those POWs came out believing those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, they do it because it works, and it's no different than things like censorship that we talk about all the time on social media platforms or in your business or whatever it is. It absolutely is psychological warfare, basically.
Yeah, and it's just like getting the people to affirm that men dressed as women are in fact women. It's that affirmation changes the way that you perceive yourself and changes the way that you perceive the world. But without getting too far away from the topic, yeah. So for that point, it'll have to be from without, and it'll have to be men that have strong bonds with one another, that get together in meet space and do all the things that men used to do. And like, this is the hardest part. Like, we're chronically online. Everyone complains about this. Everybody already knows it, but it's just a matter of picking up and doing, like setting some time aside, not making excuses, calling your friends big flamers if they decide that they're going to try and dip out on it. Like, we have pathways to do these things. It's just a matter of being dedicated to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely ripe you know basically because we're, for lack of a better word, started from scratch on these kinds of things, just because of all these masculine spaces have more or less been destroyed, if not completely infiltrated by women. They're very ripe for conquest for people like us, in the sense of they could be overtly for our guys, and they can expand out to people who are kind of outside of our in group. Then we could bring them in, because we're essentially the only people that are really doing this. Like I mean, we mentioned this earlier, but like, the regime is going to be producing left wing guys that are starting gym membership in like gun clubs and stuff like this. They're certainly not going to be doing that. So when the only game in town is us, that's a really, really good sign, and it's something that absolutely everybody should be encouraging.
Yeah, and with those sorts of things, there's always talk of tactics, like how do you do it, not get shut down? Well, keep it private, keep it small. We don't have to build clubs of like 100 people, you and four friends who maybe network with another group of four friends, etc. It's a decentralized model. But yeah, while we're waiting for Caesar, these are the things that we can do to ensure that should he show up, we will be ready.
Exactly. That's basically where I really wanted to get to with this conversation, is that um, we don't know who this man would be, because we don't have anybody, and it's been made abundantly clear for us, like with these characters like Trump and Bolsonaro, we don't have one man immediately for us all to look forward to and put like a picture up in our house or something like that and say, oh, that's my guy. We just simply don't have that within the regime, within the system. So that person is going to have to come from one of us. And because we don't know who it is, we have to build the fertile ground for that person to eventually get produced. I mean, uh, we were talking before we went on air here about how I'm starting to become a very, very big fan of this cyclical view of history. And it's just inevitable at this point. This regime, this system, it will collapse. There will be gaps in it. There will be space for somebody else to take over. Like no empire lasts forever. So it's incumbent on people like us to, wait out this civilizational winter, as it were, and wait for spring for somebody to, basically ignite that spark that lights the fire for things to finally be able to change. And as our enemy continues to become complacent and continues to produce, bug men, it's just going to be, easier and easier for us to slip through the cracks, as it were.
Yeah, and you, something to keep in mind, especially for people who are a little more black pill, the regime is not omnipotent. There's still people. They can't see the future. Maybe they do contact demons, but I doubt they give them a very accurate like prediction of what's going to happen. Um, I there. So I'm in my 30s, and I was a part of the cringe new atheist movement, and there was always a discussion surrounding cult leaders and religious prophets. Uh, do people do better off as cult leaders and religious prophets if they really believe what they're saying, or if they're purely Machiavellian and they know that what they're saying is nonsense? And usually the conclusion is the Machiavellian ones do better because the ones who really believe can end up making a mistake that costs them everything. And I think we're starting to see that more with the regime. The people who are being put in control of the apparatus of state truly believe that if everyone just changes over to uh, electric vehicles, that will no longer have to use fossil fuels. They truly believe that each individual human is a replaceable widget, no matter where they're from, no matter what race they are. And as they make decisions that affect reality, using these beliefs that in no way reflect reality, their ability to project power is going to continue to crumble. Now, there's going to be a lot of pain as that happens, but this sort of thing can't last forever. And even with all their technology, and as the technological progress continues to slow, they're not at the world control grid yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, again, I just keep getting back to this. It's like they aren't producing the kinds of people that are going to be capable to continue this regime. It's just not possible. I mean, biolendinism, as far as I'm concerned, is just a proven theory at this point for me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just, hold on. There's a fucking
Yeah, it's just the black DMV worker just all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. I cannot believe these bots, man. Like they're everywhere on all these channels. It's nuts, man. Crazy. But anywho, but yeah, exactly. The 250 pound bureaucratic worker and everything like this that wouldn't even be able to hike up a mountain with any gear on or anything like this. Like it's ridiculous. Like I guess the regime's solution to this would be to, import people from the third world in order to fulfill a bunch of these positions and just, for lack of a better word, brain drain the other competition to keep the system going. But again, you can only do that for so long and forever as well. I mean, like, as much as we like to say that the regime has like the eye of Sauron on literally everybody, and they track all your phone records and your emails and all of your bank account information, everything like this, and you know, quite frankly, like that it's just astronomical how much information they have. It's almost like analysis paralysis as far as I'm concerned. It's like, of the millions of people who are on the bad side of the regime somehow, do they really have the means to actually monitor everybody to the extent that many of us are concerned about? I mean, like the fucking IRS is 3.5 years behind on people's tax returns. The regime can't even fund itself.
Yeah, and we're starting to see. I mean, the cracks have been apparent for a long time now, but we're starting to really see it teeter. These economic, like where we are economically, is we're on a knife's edge, and there's no way off of it without falling in one direction or the other. And every single time one of these massive shifts happen, uh, the regime has to adapt. And like you were saying with the bio-Leninism, as they increasingly staff their ranks with less and less intelligent people, with less and less adaptive people, every new crisis is an opportunity for total system collapse. And they're going to come more frequently, and they're going to do more damage. But this is, again, bringing it back to this point that I really want to stress. As these avenues open, we need to be there with the ideas and the aesthetic to attract people to those ideas, so that elites can be produced from the mass who can fill the void, who can come in and take those spots that the regime used to fill. And almost all of those will start off in your localities, in your towns, in your counties.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this comes down to, again, like so many things that we talk about. It's, the foundation of all these things. It really just is, working on yourself. It really just is being aesthetically pleasing, being charismatic, knowing how to have connections with people. Obviously, it's, can be very difficult, especially after, the coof times, in these larger cities to form these kinds of groups. But it really just is like the path forward. And not just for, political purposes and stuff like this, but it really just is the way forward for you as a functioning human being. Like no one is a complete and total island. This is just the pathway to having a more and pleasant and joyful life. I mean, it's entirely possible that this regime could continue for 100 200 years or so. It's entirely possible. So who knows when this is going to end, but we still got to keep up with keeping our eye on the prize, for yourself first, and then for your family and other individuals that you really enjoy, and then the cause, whatever you want to call that, afterwards. Keeping the eye on the prize.
Yeah, and like, what does the world turns on masculine action, on men. Women are along for the ride, and they're really nice to look at, but let's be honest, they don't really help the world turn in any meaningful way. And what does modernity have to offer men? What does the current regime have to offer men? Nothing. And we all know that. That's why we're here. And that's that we offer an alternative to the drivers of history, to the ones that are going to eventually bring us into a better tomorrow, even if we're not there to see it. So really paving the way is what we should all be focusing on, at least in my estimation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been making this point, and I've been witnessing this more recently, that increasingly so, what was traditionally the way that men would actually view themselves? They would view themselves like what their skills were, what their actions were, and they weren't exactly communitarian in the sense of like women are with like a movement like feminism. But what feminism has done, because of like the sex war we're basically having, where it's like women against men basically, is that it's formed men from not exactly viewing themselves as you know uh, black men or a tradesman or a banker. It's now just forcing men to kind of view ourselves as a collective, like men as a whole. And this is why everyone is hungering for this return of masculinity in some way. People are gravitating towards people like Jordan Peterson, like people in the manosphere, like anybody basically. I mean, even people like that fucking goofball that runs Barstool Sports. Like people are gravitating towards these masculine spaces because everyone is starving for it all across the board. It doesn't matter who you are, like what group of a man. I mean, it's attack on all masculinity, and this absolutely is ripe ground for us to be taking for sure. Because there, like you said, there is nothing that the current regime is offering, especially for white men, but increasingly men in general.
Yeah, unless they want to cut off their genitals and wear skirts, but they'd still be men at that point, just not much of one. Um, but yeah, and for those of you listening, in if you don't know where you want to go or like how you want to move forward, just start lifting. Uh, that act alone, if you stick with it, your thoughts will coalesce better. You'll have a clearer mind. And if you're already lifting and that's still not a thing for you, I've got no advice.
Yeah, well, it's always the first advice when anyone gets into the manosphere. It's like, do you work out is always the first thing. I mean, like BAF makes a meme out of it by like posting physiques, but the manosphere did that, in the early 2000s on all the old forums as well. It's like post results, man. It truly is like the like first stepping stone for any semblance of masculinity is make yourself aesthetically pleasing, pick up heavy objects and put them down again. And like, yes, it absolutely does suck in the moment, but quite frankly, and this is such a meme, that like all like the gym guys will say and everything like that. It's like no one is really like upset at themselves or sad when they go to the gym. Like afterwards, like everyone is just so fucking proud of themselves in every single case. It doesn't matter about the pain. None of that stuff matters. It truly just makes you feel like a man. It's like, God damn it, this is what I was put on this earth to do. This is what I am. I'm here to be strong. I'm here to in a moment of crisis absolutely beat the living shit out of somebody else.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't even have to do it in a gym. Just go run around the woods and throw rocks around. Just make sure your form's really good while you're doing it. Um, I so talking about the Caesars though, I just want to touch on this real quick since we're coming up on some time. So I wonder, Bolsonaro was obviously given a golden opportunity here to be a great man and to do something. And I'd be interested to hear what you think about this because from what I can see, and obviously there's a lot that we don't see, um, the USA and the gay is we're weak and we're embroiled in all of this in this stuff in Ukraine where we're sending a lot of our resources and have a lot of our national focus on. Do you think that one of the reasons Bolsonaro might not seize this opportunity is because he believes that America would be able to pivot and stop him if he did what everyone wants him to do?
I certainly think it would be foolish for him not to think as such. Now the question becomes like, would the United States actually have the balls at this like current place and time to actually do something about it? I mean, there absolutely is historical precedent for in the United States. I mean, what the United States has overthrown at least what like half of the countries in South and Central America at this point. I think it's like the region of the world where we have the most action, CIA wise and foreign policy wise. So it definitely wouldn't be far fetched to suggest that the United States might have some influence here. The question then becomes, though, is that uh, has the United States been successful pulling this off with such a large country? I mean, Brazil is what, like the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. They are extremely, they have a really big military. They're one of the few countries in the world that actually produces fighter planes and fighter jets. Like they have a pretty good industrial base. So I don't know. I mean, maybe uh, I think most of the thing with Bolsonaro is what so many other people are saying is that the guy's just bought into the boomer truth regime, which seems very strange for a guy who was born in a time when Brazil was under a military dictatorship. So I'm not sure really what is going through this man's head because the opportunities certainly are there. I mean, I'll say this: he certainly's got a better shot than Trump ever did. That's absolutely
Yeah. Yeah, I
positive.
completely agree with that. I mean, a part of me wants to cope and say, well, he's just waiting to see what happens in the US midterms, but that's that's too stupid for me to even get out without laughing.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, I would hope I would hope that that would not be a thought process for him. I can't imagine that, you know, these midterms are going to have any effect as to what the gay is doing abroad. It's uh, you know, it, nothing's really going to change on that front. But yeah, it does beg the question, like, what his thought process is and everything like this. I mean, maybe we'll see. I mean, again, it's so ridiculous how almost identical this is to the Trump thing, because basically we have an election in November, and then the reins of power are officially handed over in January, and we've got a bunch of people who, in Bolsonaro and Trump's case, who are both trying to play the game by the rules with the Constitution and everything like this. We all know how that's going to turn out, on both sides. So it's, it really just is so bizarre because it just goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like these elites just do not think like us. They really don't, which is so strange. It's so weird. Like Bap made a joke on his most recent podcast that came out yesterday. He addressed the Brazil thing, and he jokingly said that like everything could have changed had someone given Bolsonaro like Bap's book, at some point. And it really, it's hilarious to think about, but it really isn't that far from the truth.
Right, if he could have only been filled with that heroic spirit. But I mean, there's also a lot we haven't considered. Because we watched the gay do what they did to Rhodesia. We've watched them, as you said, all over the southern cone. I can imagine, and now I'm just blindly speculating, that were there to be some kind of military coup, there would be a gay-backed civil war. That in Brazil there would be enough money and munitions flowing into the country for Lula's side or whoever's side it actually is to do serious violence against the majority of Brazilians. I suppose this is also, to be generous, maybe Bolsonaro really does want to avoid the amount of bloodshed that could happen to his people, and they are his people, were he to take the strongman route.
Yeah, that's certainly possible as well. I mean, there are a lot of factors to consider here. I mean, it's certainly not a coincidence that Brazil was the last explicitly, capitalist country outside of Ecuador and South America at this point. All the rest of them are run by socialists or communists at this point. So it certainly paints a pretty bleak future, for South America down there. And some of BAP's and Thomas 777's work that is the best to listen to is about the United States' history of, during the Cold War. They were actually the ones that were, along with the Soviets, were taking out this, third position that people will call it, the actual, true right wing, states and colonialism around the entire world was both done by the United States and by Russia to get rid of these places. And the United States was notorious for this throughout, South Africa and South America as well. So, this boomer idea that like, oh, the United States was pro-capitalist and the Soviets were communist, and that's all that the Cold War was. Everyone, I recommend go listen to a number of BAP's podcasts. I mean, one of the first ones he did on Angola, I think it's his second or third episode, goes over this in great deal, and then he's got many, many more that addresses this topic.
Yeah, not um, it's not outrageous to say something like the number one exporter of communism around the world has been the CIA. The and the reasons for this are soft leftism is better than any form of rightism, and that always leads to communism. But what, regardless of the motives, this is the result. And you're absolutely right. BAP's episode with Thomas 77, the first one, he talks a lot about this. Yeah, and it's just a podcast worth listening to. Uh, but I also wanted to mention real quick, when I said earlier about there being more crises and more opportunities for these things to tumble down, I think there will come a time when there's just too much going on internationally. China's threatening Taiwan, Russia's doing things in Ukraine. Uh, Brazil is gearing up for a civil war. Meanwhile, our uh, fleet is in such disrepair that the gray water tank and the freshwater tank on our aircraft carriers are leaking into one another. At some point, our ability to have the kind of force projection that we've relied upon to be the world's police force is just not going to be there anymore. And once that starts to come down, everything else will just tumble like dominoes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just on a, I mean, many people brought this up on the point of the United States military as well, is that they are increasingly running out of white guys to sign up for the military. I mean, the recruitment numbers are at an all-time low. They're destroying all semblance of standards in order to incentivize women to get in there. They're injecting it with all sorts of wokeism. I mean, and eventually, because as far as I'm concerned, the draft is just absolutely not on the table in the United States. They would never, get enough people to actually comply with that. So what are they going to do? I fully foresee in the future that they are going to, start giving incentives for all these, undocumented illegals that are here. Just say, hey, sign up for the military to fight in our wars, and we'll give you Gibbs. I could totally see something like that happening, and as was a big historical precedent in places like medieval Italy. I mean, Machiavelli talks about this in his book The Prince all the time. This is a very common tactic.
Yeah, what happens when you start relying on mercenaries? And I'd say that the second Gulf War was definitely the time when we started really relying on mercenaries, and it's just been getting worse since. So,
Yeah, very much so. I mean, so well, that was a pretty good conversation we had here about this idea. I mean, like in wrapping up, we just got to be the best men that we can be, and just be ready for when the time comes. Maybe that'll be within our lifetimes, maybe it won't be, but eventually it will come. I am convinced of this, by the way, that one day Caesar absolutely will come. This is the cycle of history. This cannot be broken. One day he will come. And it's going to be a glorious day when that does happen.
yeah, and never forget that you are what you project out into the world. Uh, how you look determines the way people treat you, determines the way that you treat them, and the way that you view others. So even if you're not doing it for these grand ideas or for the movement or for whatever, do it for yourself, and all the rest of those things will follow. And there's nothing more satisfying when someone in our circle gets challenged to post physique, and he does, and all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone go get jacked and post the physiques to dunk on people. I absolutely endorse. All right, let's wrap this up. Anything you want to show, man?
No, there's the Old Glory Club Substack that I highly suggest everybody um, subscribe to. It will have contributions from all of our favorite content creators, including myself and Red Hawk. Uh, and yeah, watch YouTube for more action uh, next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone go and subscribe to Old Glory Club on Twitter, on Substack, on YouTube. Launch day is officially Monday. We've got some really good stuff planned for you guys, and big things are coming. We've been working on this, stealthily for quite some time, and we're really excited to show you guys what all of us have been working on. Not me, not you, myself, Radlib, Charlemagne, the whole crew in the America space. So get excited for that. And with that, we'll sign off here next week on Man's Hour. The topic, we're going to have Semigog on, and we're going to talk about myths and the hero's journey. So that's going to be a really good one for everyone to tune into. So be sure to join us for that. And until next time, guys, be well.
Later.